Hello and welcome to WorldCanvass from International Programs at the University of Iowa. I'm Joan Kjaer. We're coming to you from FilmScene in downtown Iowa City, and we're happy to have you join us for part 3 of this series called Food for Thought. In this section, we're going to be looking at the interconnectedness of food and culture. I can't wait to introduce the guests we have in this segment. First, though, I'd like to invite all of you to join us for the live programs if you haven't yet been here in this wonderful venue downtown in Iowa City. Otherwise, you can catch these shows later on UITV, YouTube, or iTunes. Information about upcoming shows, as well as links to archived programs, can be found at international.uiowa.edu. And you can learn more about FilmScene at icfilmscene.org. So as I mentioned, we're now going to turn our attention to the cultural resonance of food, a conversation about food and ethnicity, and food and the expression of culture. And there's a lot to talk about here, and joining me are 3 very interesting guys. Ari Ariel is right next to me. He's a visiting assistant professor in the University of Iowa Department of Religious Studies, and he is also a trained chef. So that's an interesting little twist on his background. We'll find out more about that. Next to him is Naftaly Stramer, co-owner of Oasis Falafel in Iowa City. Thank you for being here, Naftaly.
Thank you.
And at the far end, we have Ofer Sivan, co-owner of Oasis Falafel in Iowa City. And we'll also talk about your interesting prior career interests before you became restaurant owners in just a minute. But Ari, let me start with you. So you're teaching here in the Department of Religious Studies, and I'd like to know more or less what you're teaching in terms of your sort of religious angle and Middle Eastern studies and so on. But how does food play into all of that? How do you bring your interest and your background in food into your more scholarly studies?
So I guess in general, my work is on Middle Eastern studies and Middle Eastern Jewish communities. So I work on Jews mostly from the Arab world. Before graduate school, I went to culinary school and worked in restaurants for a few years, and at some point decided the Arabs were terrible and it wasn't a good lifestyle. So I applaud all of you who actually do it. It wasn't for me. So I went back to graduate school, and now I'm trying to mix these 2 loves by focusing on Middle Eastern studies, but also on food and foodways as part of that.
Yeah, so foodways. What do you mean by foodways?
Everything that is encompassed in the way people eat and how that impacts their lives. So it could be, you know, whether they use a knife and fork, or it could be the latest food trends. It really, there's a broad range.
Yeah. Well, you guys are all connected in the sense that the kind of food we're going to be talking about tonight has origins, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm thinking of these as having sort of Middle Eastern origins. The foods that Oasis Falafel has provided here for the reception tonight, some of the foods we know, you know, the hummus, the beautiful breads that you've brought, and these very, very nice fresh vegetables and so on. These all originate in what we would think of as Israel, Palestine, Arab cultures, North Africa. Where do these foods that we're likely to talk about, like hummus, for example, where do they originate? Is there a way to figure that out, or do people fight over who was the originator of a particular project?
People certainly fight about it.
Yeah.
We know that they originate more or less in what we consider the Middle East. We don't have a lot of cookbooks for the region. So the last Arabic language cookbooks we have before the modern period are from the 13th century. And what happens in between there gets a little tricky. But in the 13th century, there are recipes for dishes that are pretty similar to what we consider hummus, so mashed chickpeas. The one I'm thinking of now sort of brings me back to the last section where it's not a real recipe. By modern standards, it says take chickpeas, sesame paste, a whole bunch of nuts, a whole bunch of spices, mash them up, roll it out, and leave it overnight. Right? So it's not exactly what we think of as hummus, but it's connected. And how that transforms into the 20th century dish isn't clear, but it is pretty clear that it happens in this region.
Well, so food is as an expression of ethnicity or identification or community connection. How does that work in the Middle East?
In the Middle East, it's tricky because the national borders are so new. So until World War I, this was all the Ottoman Empire, or most of it was the Ottoman Empire, and a lot of the foods were shared among different regions in the Ottoman Empire. After borders are established with World War I, then the fighting begins, right? So there's debate about whether hummus is Lebanese or Syrian or Jordanian or Israeli or what have you.
Well, let me just toss it down to you two guys who have been friends for some time, decided you're going to open up this restaurant, and you introduced some foods that many of us in this community hadn't really had much familiarity with before. And Naftaly and Ofer, as we get going, could you just tell us how you met and what you had been studying or working in at that point?
Well, I'm a high-tech guy by profession, computer engineer. And I was in my profession, the high-tech profession, from 1981 to 1994, when we opened Oasis. And in 1993, one thing led to another. I left my job and was looking for another job in high-tech. And I know Ofer because I know his dad. And as Israelis, when they move to one place to another, the first thing they find out when the area they're moving into, are there any Israelis over there? So what I did is I called the rabbi and I said, hey, is there any Israelis in town? And he said, oh yeah, there's a guy, Danny. And you should talk to him, he's there. And Danny is Ofer's dad. And you know, I came for an interview in here. We were living in Boulder, Colorado, and Danny came and actually met me at my hotel and took me for a round, and we became good friends. And so I met Ofer. I think he was in Kentucky at this time, but he came back to Iowa City. And this is how we met. So when I left my high-tech position after so many years, actually it was his brother, Ari. They came, and we were sitting one day at the Ped Mall, and he said, you know what, there's no falafel, and there's no good falafel in this city. Why don't we open a falafel business? And I was joking. I said, no, you're not serious. But they somehow inserted this bug into me. And a year later, after a lot of hustle and bustle, we opened Oasis. And that's how we started this thing. My idea was that the reason it will work is because Iowa City is a very diversified community. It's people from all over the world. And I said, those people must really love those changes in food. It's something new. There was actually no Middle Eastern food, no good Middle Eastern food in here. There are some now, but still not a lot. And it worked. I told you when we talked that our first check came from our health inspector who helped us, and he came and said, you know, guys, you guys will really succeed. And I said, how do you know? It's like, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. You know, my wife was joking about me doing falafel and cooking, and he said, the city needs something like this. You know, it's something that and we started it. It works. You know.
So neither one of you had background as a businessman, procuring the raw ingredients for these foods, setting up a legal restaurant.
I mean, I had just graduated from engineering.
That's the connection.
Barely graduated. So, and then my brother, suggested the idea, and I've lived here more or less my whole life. And just right away I was like, yeah, we need falafel here for sure. I grew up. My mom grew up in Iowa City. Her parents were from New York, and my dad was from Israel. And so I grew up here in Chicago, and we'd go to Israel and eat falafel, and come back, no falafel. Then we moved to Chicago, and there's falafel, but it was terrible. So every time we go to Israel, I'd eat as much falafel as I could. We go to lunch, get falafel. My dad and my brother would take a nap. So I take some money out of his wallet and go get more falafel because I knew it's coming back. So I need to get it while I can. So I didn't realize that I was actually doing research in falafel. But we're like, it's just by coincidence, we're like European Jews, which is not, falafel is like a Middle Eastern Jews or Muslims or Christian, but it's not from the European. But that culture kind of, being from Israel, we take that. We also serve like the chicken noodle soup at Oasis, or matzo ball soup. But that's like a European dish. But it starts to, people don't really differentiate, and maybe they shouldn't. Who cares really what it's from?
Definitely not here. You were saying there's no cookbooks, right? And the reason is because like people like my mother, who used to cook something, and somebody asked her, one of her friends was really offended by her, and she did some dish, and somebody asked her for the recipe, and she said, I don't know. And he said, what do you mean you don't know? And I don't know, I'm just taking, she used to cook from something that she didn't even like, and she never tasted it, but something came up perfect. And when she told this friend, I don't know, and they thought she just doesn't want to give them the recipe. And so, and then again, going back to what Ofer said in Israel, it's like a culture of so many. Think about taking 7, 8, 9 countries, putting them together in like this small area of New Jersey or something like that. And you have cultures from Morocco and even the Northern Africa countries are so different from each other, Morocco and Tunisia, and people are proud about their food, especially in the Middle East. It's like, mine is the best. We know, for example, I know a Lebanese, actually one of my Lebanese friends that says, I will not eat at your restaurant because you have pocket pita, and we only eat falafel in a wrap. So that's part of this. I know what I'm doing. Mine is the best, and that's how the Middle East is, by the way.
Israel is actually very interesting in that sense. It's similar to what Lauren was saying earlier about American cuisine, where there really is no traditional Israeli cuisine, right, because it's such a new country. But like the US, you have immigrants from lots of different places coming in Israel in a very short period of time. So it's sort of a cauldron for the mixing of culinary cuisines and cultures.
Yeah. Well, and then, you bring foods like this to a place like Iowa with people who might love it once they taste it, but at the very beginning, you probably have to, I don't know how you educate people to try a new food. Is it just that it smells so good that anybody who walks by your restaurant? Free samples. Yeah.
But we were wrong, and I think we underestimated how much native Iowans like our food. But you see that, 20 years ago, sushi was like exotic, and now it's not. It still might be considered upscale, but it's not like way out there or anything like that. So we've, really, we sell our hummus in Cedar Rapids. That is probably less diverse than Johnson County, in Des Moines. So it's really popular. People don't look too much into the ethnic. They don't really care. They just want good food, nutritional, and that's good, really.
It is a sampling. You have to get people to sample it. And one of the ways, is, we do a lot of caterings, especially in the university, and people will try it because this is what they have, They get lunch, and they get lunch from Oasis. Like, what can you do? You have to try it. And then they say, oh, wow, it's good, and they, we tried, for example, at Oasis, we tried to make like a marketing, like a logo, we tried to make it everywhere. And we put it in our hummus or our packs that we sell at the university. We had a woman coming last week, and she said, I'm eating this stuff for years, and I never knew that you guys are a restaurant in here. I just found out. But she was eating this food. So that's how, we're trying. People coming to the restaurant. When was last week? Somebody said to Ofer, like, it's not like my mother was, or my grandmother is doing. He was from Lebanon, and Ofer tried to persuade him, okay, try this and try this. And so, we educated him a little bit. And it's all about education.
And did you come to agreement on what your own particular recipes would be very quickly, very easily? Because there are lots of ways, I suppose, to blend the ingredients for hummus or for...
We seem to agree, luckily, on pretty much everything. He doesn't like tomatoes.
Yeah.
But other than that, he's a pretty good business partner.
No, but we had to run the recipes by a few people. Our first falafel was a disaster. Danny, Ofer's dad, did some reception in his house, and we tried our first falafel, and we didn't realize why those falafel balls are not balls, and they just fall apart. And I remember my wife was looking at me and said, seriously, you want to open a restaurant? and second batch was, a little bit better. The third one, I got all my Israeli friends, and I said, listen, guys, you try it, and if one of you saying that this is great, I'm going to kill you. I need criticism, and which you don't get a lot from American people, but Israelis are very critical. They know how to criticize. And it was good because, we got feedback. And
Yeah.
you do stuff when you open a restaurant, at the beginning, you do stuff like you like.
Yeah.
And you have to realize it's not about you, it's about your customers.
Yeah.
Like our first falafel was really spicy until, and the first time I realized it is, and I love spicy food. Hani El-Kadi, which everybody knows in Iowa City, came to me and said, it's too spicy, it's not good for me. And I said, really? And so we realized, okay, it is, and so we have to tone it down. And some people will say, okay, we need it more spicy, here's the hot sauce.
Yeah.
Just put on it,
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not about you again, it's about your customers. Of course, you're the one with the passion and everything, but it's about your customers. And this is what I think worked with us, is we kept looking at our customers and what do they want, how do they want it? And the recipe involved, we also, a really big part of our recipe development is our employees.
Oh, yeah.
We encourage our employees to eat. We give them free food as much as they want while they're working.
Yeah.
And they need to tell us, okay, this is not good, or you know what, if you add a little bit of this, maybe this will make it better.
So the big falafel debate in the Middle East is fava beans or chickpeas.
Right.
Oh.
And in Egypt, where it's called taimiyah, it's almost entirely fava beans. And as you go farther north, chickpeas become more dominant. So do you use both, or do you?
No, we use
Chickpeas only.
That's how
And
we
there's also cilantro versus parsley.
And you use,
cilantro.
We use
Cilantro.
cilantro, but that can be that can vary on the block.
yeah.
And some now there's high-end falafel restaurants in Israel where you have dill, whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Ari, we were talking a little bit before the program, and one of the topics I thought we would discuss was the relationship between food and religious identity in Israel. Just taking Israel as an example. What's the breakdown? What are
So Israel's kind of an interesting example. There's Jewish food and there's Israeli food, which tend to mean two separate things. Jewish food has come to mean something similar to what it means in the U.S. So Ashkenazi food, gefilte fish, things of that nature. And Israeli food is much more broadly based on Middle Eastern food. And then there's a question of religious observance. So until fairly recently, it was assumed that most public food in Israel would be kosher, but that's actually less and less true. So a couple of years ago, 2010, I think, a doctor in Israel published a book called The White Book, which was a book about pork cookery, and some of the new sort of hip Israeli places in Tel Aviv use shrimp and things like that on a normal basis. So it's still part of Israeli ethnic identity food, but it's transitioning as Israel transitions and becomes more or less secular depending on the timing.
Yeah, you said that the Israeli government is sort of interested in promoting a new Israeli cuisine.
Yeah, the Israeli government for the last 3 or 4 years at least has been promoting new Israeli cuisine. Also in 2010, I believe, if I'm getting the date right, they sponsored an online course with the New York Times on new Israeli cuisine, so you could take it from any place in the US, or I guess abroad, it was in English, sort of trying to stress both the connections to older biblical foods and to biblical ingredients and to Jewish religion, but also to modern cuisines and to show how Israeli cuisine had developed, using modern techniques and French techniques and also Middle Eastern ingredients. So it's really become a fusion, as sort of a fusion's, I guess, a bad word in the food industry, but a fusion in a positive sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about food and community. I mean, clearly we've heard a little bit about how from one block to the next you can use different ingredients, or a Lebanese guy and an Israeli guy might have a different concept of whatever. But generally speaking, food and community, when you do the kinds of ethnic studies that you've done, what is it about food really that connects people in such a deep, deep, deep way?
It's partially memory. I mean,
Yeah.
similar to what you were talking about earlier, everybody remembers their mother's food, and this is why you can never really compete with what your grandmother or your mother cooked, right? A restaurant can't do that and probably shouldn't. So it's partially about memory. It's partially about national and ethnic identity, which have become probably more important in the last century than they ever had been, right? So it's become important to every country that sees itself as modern and progressive to have a national cuisine, right? So all the European countries promote their cuisines, and now Israel and lots of countries in the Middle East do the same. And sometimes that leads to conflict in an area where the cuisines are basically the same. So a few years ago, the Lebanese tried to get a trademark on the term hummus in Europe, for example.
Didn't work?
Didn't work. The regulations are very good at you know, things like Parmesan or Champagne, where you can regulate a certain area or country where a food is produced, but you can't exclude other people, and Lebanon was primarily trying to exclude Israeli hummus production. And of course, Syria and Jordan and Palestine and other places saw themselves as natural hummus producers. More recently, Sabra has been trying to get the FDA to trademark the term hummus in the US. So that trademark is the wrong term here, but to regulate what could be used in packaged hummus. Yeah. And all of that then ties back to national cuisine, so people take a certain pride in their food as opposed to the food of the other.
Yeah, sure. So how would you feel if Sabra was able to trademark it?
Well, I think what Sabra is trying to do is deregulate it, because their product is very low percentage chickpeas and tahini, which are the expensive ingredients, which are also nutritious.
Yeah.
So there's mostly oil and water. So if they want to do that, I'm probably against it. I mean, if they said it was 40, 50% chickpea and tahini like our product, they'd probably go out of business.
Yeah.
I don't know how they do it. It's brown whipped oil.
Yeah.
And you know, they market it as healthy, and I guess that benefits us indirectly because people think hummus is healthy, which it can be when I make it. But when they do, it's no good.
Yeah.
I mean,
so what are the ingredients in hummus? The basic ingredients in the hummus you make? You don't have to tell me. Oh, are there some secrets that you can't reveal?
Chickpeas, tahini, which is a sesame paste. Really, that's the only essential. I would say olive oil. And then you can get pretty creative after that. We keep it pretty tame. Lemon juice, water, salt, garlic.
I should probably add that hummus is, in fact, the Arabic word for chickpea.
Yeah.
Right? So it's sort of traditionally the dish is hummus bit tahina, meaning hummus in
With tahini.
tahina. Right? But we've come to use hummus as a shorthand for all that. So
It's
part of
chickpea.
the gripe of Sabra is, and I'm certainly not siding with them, I agree with you completely, but they're complaining against things like black bean hummus or white bean hummus, which they're saying don't make much sense if hummus is chickpeas. But their statement, their legal, their petition to the FDA also includes lots of chemicals and other
It's like
things they'd like to include.
kebab. Kebab means beef.
Yeah.
So you say like a chicken kebab. Doesn't make any sense. But so the meaning changes. And in America, kebab means a skewer, which is actually the shish, like shish kebab. So
You adjust yourself to the culture of the locals, right?
somebody asked me how it's gyro is pronounced, and it's like euro, hero, gyro, gyro. I say gyro. I asked Dr. Science. Do you know Dr. Science?
Yeah.
He said it's pronounced gyro. It's good enough for me.
You were asking about food and community.
Yeah.
When we moved to our city, every Friday we used to meet at Danny's house, all of the Israeli community, which is not a lot, but a few families. And what did we bring? It was all about food. It's like everybody brought something, and we met together, and we ate. And my kids, I have 3 boys, they're all out of the house. All they remember from those things is Danny's schnitzels. It's like the food that he used to eat at Danny. So it's all about food. And Kurt was saying that his family is, talking at lunchtime, what are we going to eat at dinner? We do the same thing. We meet with the boys, and we eat something and say, what do we eat tomorrow or in the morning, or where do we eat this? And everything is surrounding about food, and it's a great, mix together with sticking the community.
But about food and religion, I grew up, mostly I would say moved here when I was 3, and my parents were Jews but not observant. And despite this weekly Jewish stuff, we ate bacon all the time. Sunday especially was like bacon day. So we moved to Chicago when I was 10, and I went to a Jewish day school just kind of to try it. And I'd never heard of kosher. Never came up, never heard the word before I was 10 years old. So I was like, I can't eat what? So that was a surprise, and maybe that's just an Israeli thing. But the religion and the culture don't always line up exactly.
Yeah.
And especially the history of the Jewish community of the U.S. is all about what foods are acceptable and what not, and how do you fight for or against kashrut, right? So there's this famous banquet in the 50s, I think, called the Treif banquet, where the Reform the Organization of Reform Judaism has this banquet that's filled with non-kosher foods.
Oh, really?
Right, just sort of to make a point against. So Jewish history is sort of full of this
Yeah, yeah.
religious.
One of the reasons you said that more like pork or is coming into Israel and about this book is there was a big immigration from Russia. And it's huge, like 20% of the country came, like 1.5 million Jews. Well, you know, when the Russian opened the gates, and some of them, you know, brought in. It's like, hey, we don't eat kosher. We never heard about kosher, like Ofer said.
Yeah.
Wasn't allowed even to talk over there about,
Oh, sure.
you know, being Jewish or religious or something like that. So they wanted this food, and smart businessmen, they come in and they put it up and they bring the supply. If there's a demand, they will do a supply, and you have to be tricky. And the government is not allowing to raise hogs on government ground. So there's a lot of tricks how to overcome this.
We
But
should keep the hogs raised
keep the hog
off the
raised
ground.
off the ground.
It's not legal
Cleanliness,
to have pig on the ground in Israel,
Right.
so they can put on pallets.
Wow.
So it's all about, again, it's all about where the people are coming from, what do they eat at home, what do they want, and it's how the community survives.
Right. So, Ari, do you miss your chef days, or?
I do. I miss the adrenaline of the kitchen a little bit, but I still cook all the time. So
Yeah.
I guess
So what do you
my
love
wife
to
benefits the
What
most.
do you love to cook? What are the?
I'm a carnivore. I'm a meat person.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And do you cook recipes very often that you think are, or foods that you think of as ethnic foods from your family's
I
past?
do sometimes. My father's family is from Yemen,
Ah, yeah,
so occasionally I have a craving for that sort of food. Things that are probably not very familiar, but it's sort of a paste made of fenugreek that's kind of spicy that I really love.
Yeah, good.
And lots
Yeah.
of spicy foods.
Yeah, great. Wow, this is such fun. Thank you so much. A big thank you to you two guys from Oasis for catering, along with Devotee, the food we had earlier tonight. And thank you so much, Ofer, Sivan, and Naftaly, Stramer. Thank you. Thank you, Ari Ariel. Pleasure to have you all here. And that's all for our program tonight. Thank you all for coming. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And you'll be able to catch this program again on iTunes, on YouTube, and on UITV, also at the International Programs website, which is international.uiowa.edu. I hope you can join us next time on February 3rd. We have an interesting topic, which is tobacco, pot, and the public interest, and I hope you can join us. That's February 3rd here in this space. And I'm Joan Kjaer for International Programs. Thanks very much, and we'll see you soon.